Mr. Burdella, you're sitting here as a man who's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. You've confessed to murder of 6 young men in this city and crimes that horrified the city and much of the country. You've confessed to, in various degrees, felonious restraint, drugging people, sexually abusing them, torturing them, killing them, dismembering them. And until now, you've refused all interviews. So in light of all those facts, I have to ask you, why are you here? What is it you have to say to us? What is it you want to say about yourself in this case?
Well, I've had the media clamoring to get interviews with me. And after I made my last pleas, I wanted to get at least part of my side of it out. I've found it very hard to find any way to do that in Kansas City. The media has so biased my case, portraying me as being non-human, and their motivation is no separate from the way I treated my victims. I treated them as something less than human, nothing more than a play toy or a play object. This is what the media has done to me. It's dehumanized me so that it can believe, along with the public, that things like human sacrifice, Satanism, demonic practices are more believable than me being the neighbor next door who reached a point in his life where he could do monstrous acts. That's not the same thing as being a monster.
We got some interesting artwork right here. Some of these people right here have some real talent. This is a pretty artsy neighborhood here in Kansas City, Missouri. You got the Art Institute of Kansas City about a half a mile over yonder. And in this very artsy neighborhood, several years ago, almost 40 to be exact, lived a man by the name of Robert Burdella. Robert liked to do many things with his hands. He was an artist like some of these people that you see their work behind me. He also loved to kill gay male prostitutes and torture them. In this video today, we're going to talk about some of the sick and twisted things that Butcher Bob did in the confines of his own home. We're going to visit that home. And a little bit of a warning for you guys. There's some pretty disgusting, foul things in this video. If you are sensitive to violence and stuff of that nature, you might want to skip this video. Without further ado, let's start walking, and we're going to start talking about Butcher Bob Burdella, the butcher of Kansas City. Let's get rolling. Robert Burdella was born on January 31st, 1949 in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. And his childhood growing up kind of reads like a prototypical kid that has physical deficiencies and he gets bullied at school. Well, first of all, he was very nearsighted, so he wore glasses. He probably had those really thick Coke bottle glasses that kids would often wear back in the 50s and the 60s. Number two, this kid wasn't very athletic. As a matter of fact, he was so unathletic, his father would often beat him because he wasn't very good at sports. And in school, he's not very popular, and he has really no friends at all whatsoever. And he has another little secret that he dare not tell anybody, not even people that he would imagine that he would be close to. And that little secret was that Robert was gay. He knew when he was 7, 8 years old that he liked other boys. But of course, back in those days, you weren't really free to go ahead and be yourself without facing ridicule, as opposed to today where you can kind of go out and gallivant, be yourself, and no one's going to think anything differently. Well, at least in this neighborhood anyways, because this looks like a pretty chill, nice neighborhood. So After Robert finishes high school, I don't know why, but he moves out here to Kansas City and he starts attending the Art Institute of Kansas City, which is, of course, about a half a mile over there. And when he's at the school, he remains pretty much the same kind of recluse that he was back in Ohio. For an art project, I don't know why he did this, because probably he's insane, but he got a duck and he killed it and he cooked it. But when he was in class, he explained how he tortured this duck before he killed it. Yeah, this guy loved hurting animals and really loved hurting people. After being lambasted by one of the officials at the school for this disgusting display that Bob considered art, he decided to drop out of school. So now you don't have a job, you're in Kansas City, and you're an artist or whatever kind of artist this guy thought he was. So he decides to open up a shop at the Westport flea market. He had a booth there where he would display and sell his artwork. He would sell jewelry, antique jewelry, and different antiques from all around the world. He called it Bob's Bizarre Bazaar. So he has this shop, and that's how he's making the bulk of his living. But also, Bob had another penchant. He loved picking up prostitutes, gay male prostitutes. He would ply them with drugs. Basically, anybody in the area, if you were a gay youth, you knew that you can go to Bob's place to hang your head. But also they knew that when you go to that dude's house, he's going to expect something else out of you, to say the least. So teenage runaways, gay male prostitutes, drug addicts, just, fringes of society that really don't have a place to go would go to Bob's house. And in a sense, it was basically a flop house. Throughout the years, as Bob is living here in this neighborhood, he has his little shop. He's picking up gay male prostitutes. The constant sex and drugs and booze, it's getting a little bit boring. Bob is starting to discover that it's getting harder and harder for him to get off, so to speak, with just regular sex that he's constantly paying for. So one of his sick, disgusting fantasies that he would write in his many, many notebooks is of how he would love to get somebody, kidnap them, drug them, tie them up, torture them, rape them, and then finally dispose of them. And he would go on to live out his disgusting fantasies starting in 1984. His first victim was 19-year-old Jerry Howell. He was the son of Paul Howell. I think he was some kind of a business associate of his, something along those lines. So Jerry needed a ride, I believe, to school or a school function, something along those lines. And instead of taking him to this function, he somehow convinces him to come home with him. Maybe he said, hey, I have some marijuana, you want to smoke? Whatever he, told him to, reason for him to get into his home. So he gets this kid into his home and he proceeds to drug him. He would use either Valium or some other kind of prescription narcotic that he would buy off of the street. So for the ensuing, what might possibly be weeks, he has this guy constantly drugged up, tied up to a chair in his basement. And when he's finally done with Jerry, he goes ahead and kills him. He hangs him up on some kind of either like a meat hook or chained him up, something along those lines. And he would make cuts in the major arteries of the body and basically bleed him out. Then he would dismember the body parts. He would wrap them up in trash bags and simply put the trash can out for the trash man to come get the following morning. His next victim would be 23-year-old Robert Sheldon. Now, Jerry Howell by this time has been missing for many, many weeks now. And just like anything in life, when a person goes missing, there's a fervor of information being let out by the police, and then it kind of dies down and people stop talking about it. So he gets his next victim, per usual, convincing him to come to his house, and he would get this guy, drug him, tie him up, and rape him. Now this time, he's feeling a little bit frisky in his own sick, deviant mind. So he decides to get, for some unknown reason, we don't know why people like this do these disgusting things. He gets drain cleaner and pours it in this guy's eyes just because he's sick. And then he takes the drain cleaner and makes him drink it. He wants to turn this guy into some kind of blind mute for some unknown reason. And then he would take a caulking gun with caulk and fill his ears, stick it right into his ear and just fill it up with that stuff. And then eventually, just like Jerry, kill him, string him up, bleed him out, dismember him, take the body parts, put it in his black trash bags. One of his victims' skull, for some unknown reason, he wanted to keep it as a souvenir, so he buried it in his basement. I believe also another skull he buried in his backyard. Mark Wallace, Walter James Ferris, and Todd Stoops. These would be the next three victims of Bob Berdella. From 1984 to 1987, Bob would go on to kill 6 young men, some of them prostitutes, some of them runaways, some of them just needed a place to stay. His last victim, Larry Wayne Pearson, was probably tortured the worst. He was kept in his basement, held captive, being constantly drugged, constantly raped for the better part of 6 weeks. Finally, after he couldn't take any more, he finally died when Bob Berdella took his fist and sodomized it with him, rupturing his anal cavity, and that is how he died. He bled to death. Chris Bryson might have been a runaway. I don't remember quite off the top of my head if he was a prostitute or not, but he would have been the victim number 7 of Bob Berdella had he not earned his trust. And as he was torturing Mr. Bryson, somehow he earned his way to where instead of him being constantly tied up to his bed, he would let him tie his hands in front of him. And one night he was tied up, but he had his hands again in front of him, and he either lit a match or there was a candle, and he lit the rope on fire to break the ropes apart to free himself. He runs the hell out of this house, goes to the police, and tells them his harrowing tale. Now, Bob Berdella's house used to be right in front of you, 4315 Charlotte. And of course, this house right here, that's 4319. And that one right there is 4311. So the house would have sat right about here in front of you. And of course, after everything was found out, they tore the house completely down. When the police came to question Bob Berdella, they found a very disgusting sight right in before their very eyes. They found blood on the carpet, all along the walls. When they went into his basement, they found blood in some barrels that he had. And finally, after they took him down to the station and they're asking him what's going on, to make a long story short, he finally confessed, but he told them beforehand that he needed to be reassured that he wouldn't get the death penalty and he would confess to all the murders that he committed. And as the police are talking to him, they're going through his house and they found pictures of the torture, the sexual torture that Bob was doing to all those young men inside of his home. And he would keep very detailed notes of all of the murders and the tortures he was committing. He would write down who they were, how he picked them up, how he knew them, how he felt while he was doing it. Very, very detailed, to say the least. And I don't know why they offered him any kind of a deal at all. I mean, you had the evidence, you had quite an assortment of pictures of men in varying degrees of distress, tied up and being tortured. But possibly to save the taxpayers of Kansas City what would possibly be more than $1 million to try this case. And then you're going to have all the death penalty, you trying to get appeals, and you would get a long, drawn-out process of finding justice for those young men. So they agreed. They said, okay, fine, we'll give you life in prison. Just tell us everything. And he would tell them how he would dispose of the bodies. And that's pretty much the story of, in my opinion, Kansas City's most infamous serial killer, Bob Berdella. He was eventually sentenced, of course, to life in prison, and he died, I think, October the 8th, 1992. He had a massive heart attack, and he died, I want to say he was 42 or 43 years of age. It's quite amazing that this neighborhood, how nice it is, and, a very disgusting, perverted creep lived in this very neighborhood. I'm pretty sure people in this area know, who he was, and, the house's location and all this stuff, but who knows? Anyways, guys, I am out of here. I'm hitting the road. I will catch up with you on the next vlog. Have a good one. Until next time, peace out.